The morning the wallet found him, Cale Murad woke to the tannic scent of damp cardboard and the soft percussion of rain beating on the shelter's metal awning. He had slept in a quilt someone's grandmother had donated, cabbage rose squares stitched so long ago the thread had turned the color of old tea. The city around him was waking into a kind of gray that eats edges, buses hissed, shop grates rattled, and somewhere a bakery cracked its first loaf. He sat up, felt the cold pass through his jacket like a rumor, and counted his coins, 3 quarters, 2 dimes, a foreign token that bought nothing but hope. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. He tucked the coins into his sock because socks were the only place on the street that felt like a locked drawer. 16 in years, 40 in worries, he had learned the geometry of invisibility, how to stand 6 inches left of notice, how to nod without inviting conversation, how to move like a ghost through places that counted heads for head count's sake. Yet hunger has a way of coloring the air with urgency, and that morning it painted the world in sharpened angles. The wallet lay at the end of the bus bench the way a question lies at the end of a sentence, bold, rectangular, undeniably present. Brown leather. A scratch down the middle like a healed scar. Cale saw it, glanced away, then glanced back because his stomach clenched. He did the math, if there was cash inside, he could eat a proper breakfast, maybe even 2. He could buy the thick socks they sold 2 for $5 at the discount store. He could not. He reached for it all the same, because you cannot return what you have not touched. It was heavier than he expected. Inside, a driver's license, 3 credit cards, a folded receipt from a pharmacy, a punch card for a cafe with 7 tiny coffee cups stamped across it, and, pressed beneath the plastic flap of the license, a photograph of a little girl missing her front teeth, cheeks freckled to the edges of her smile. Tucked behind the photograph, almost as an afterthought, an insurance card, edges dog-eared, name in sober font, Mira Vance. On the other cards, the same name. On the receipt, another word that pulsed with its own gravity, oncology. The bus pulled in and exhaled a warm, diesel breath. He could have slipped the wallet into his backpack and boarded, he could have vanished into the day and called it mercy because his bones ached in the language of empty. But the wallet had a gravity he recognized from another life, the magnetism of things that belong to someone, that will make a hole in the world if they don't return to their original shape. Cale looked up the block. The pharmacy from the receipt sat on the corner like a white-tiled ship in a sea of wet pavement. He could bring the wallet there, ask if they knew the owner, see if he could pass the responsibility off like a baton. But he had learned that when you hand a good deed to a counter, sometimes it falls through the cracks between transactions and never reaches its destination. He turned the driver's license under the rain. The address wasn't far, walkable if your shoes pretended to be boats. He packed the wallet into the inner pocket of his jacket, tugged the zipper until its metal teeth met like clenched hands, and started walking. The city in rain is a classroom, you learn what leaks and what holds, who rushes and who lifts their face like a pilgrim. Cale kept his head down, but he noticed everything. The man in the tailored coat stepping around a puddle like he was stepping around responsibility. The girl with purple hair laughing into a phone, joy pouring out of her like birds. The way the street vendors' umbrellas bloomed above carts like paper flowers stubborn against the season. At the crosswalk, an outreach worker he knew, Maya Kestrel, small as a robin and twice as fierce, caught his sleeve with 2 fingers. "You eaten?" she asked. "Soon," he said, which in shelter speak meant no. Her eyes flicked to the hard line in his jacket where the wallet hid. He felt her see it and felt shame prick the back of his neck, hot as fever. "Not mine," he murmured. Maya's mouth did a small thing then, the kind of smile you give a tightrope walker who finds the wire with their foot on the first try. "Be careful," she said. "You don't know what story is attached to the thing you're carrying." He wanted to say he knew exactly, the word from the receipt was rolling around in his head like a marble in a ceramic bowl. Instead he nodded, and the light changed, and he kept walking. Mira Vance lived in a building whose bricks had made peace with ivy. The entry smelled like rain trudged in on old carpets. On the 3rd floor, a hallway sighed into the kind of silence that turns ears inward. He found the door from the license, knocked twice, and waited. It opened to a woman who looked as if she had been doing everything at once for several months. Early 30s, hair piled in an efficient knot, scrub top beneath a cardigan pilled at the sleeves. Her eyes took him in, the damp jacket, the frayed cuff, the posture like apology, and in that split second he saw her sort him into categories: unknown, young, possibly selling, possibly asking, possibly danger. "I found this," he blurted, and held the wallet out like a peace offering. Her hand flew to her collarbone as if steadying herself. "Oh," she said, then again, "oh," like the second syllable held more air than the first. She opened the wallet and skimmed its contents with the speed of someone who has been missing not just objects but time. Credit cards. License. Insurance card. Photograph. "I didn't even know." She stopped and looked at him fully for the first time. "Where did you?" "Bus bench," he said. "Near 9th. The photograph had slid up from under the plastic. The little girl's toothless grin looked like a sunrise you could hold in your hand. "That's Izzy," the woman said. "Isolde. She prefers Izzy because Isolde sounds like a queen with a heavy crown." A sound moved through her then, half laugh, half sob, and she put her fingers over her eyes for a heartbeat. When she looked again, the look was embarrassment braided with relief. "I'm sorry. I'm Mira. Thank you. You probably saved me hours with the bank and the insurance, today of all days." Cale heard that echo, the way people say today when they mean a today that matters more than the other todays. "Oncology," he said before he could stop himself. Myra's face did another thing, the wariness that lived around her mouth softened, and her hand went to the photo. "Izzy has an appointment," she said quietly. "A big one." She reached into the wallet, pulled out a bill, hesitated, put it back. "Wait here." She vanished deeper into the apartment. He stood very still because sometimes moving triggers a trap you didn't know you were standing in. When she returned, she held not money but a Tupperware of pasta wrapped in a dish towel, still warm enough to fog the lid. She offered it with both hands as if handing over something sacred. "I can't," he started. "You already did," she said simply. "Please." Pride is a door that locks from the inside. Hunger is a key that fits every stubborn lock. He took the food. She scribbled a phone number on the back of a grocery list and pressed it into his palm. "If you ever need," she began, then stopped, as if realizing the absurdity of the sentence. "Need is a mansion with endless rooms." "I'll be okay," he lied, because she needed him to. "Good luck today." "Thank you," she said, voice steadying around the word. "No, wait. What's your name?" "Cale," he said. "Cale Murad." "Cale Murad," she repeated like a promise she was making to herself. Then the buzzer sounded behind him, a machine impatience. He nodded, she nodded, and the door closed on a line neither of them could see but both felt crossing them, the line where strangers stop being entirely strangers. He ate the pasta under the awning of a closed shop, steam on his face, rain on his hood. He tried to imagine the building where oncology lives, the tall glass, the chairs and rows like waiting was a job, the way fear must curl around people's ankles like persistent cats. He tried not to imagine what it would feel like to lose the insurance card, to explain to a nurse named something cheerful that you are not irresponsible, you are simply human on a day when being human is too much. Cale returned to the shelter with the dish towel clean and folded in his backpack, because you return what isn't yours and, when possible, you return it better. The dining room hummed with metal trays and late morning stories. Brother Jonah, who wasn't a brother of any order, just a man with a voice like flannel, stood by the coffee urn talking about the local football team as if every person within earshot might be recruited to play by afternoon. Cale slid into the back row, let heat seep into his hands from a paper cup, and listened dumbly to hope dressed as small talk. "Got something in your eyes today," Brother Jonah said, not asking. He had a talent for statement questions, those lifelines for people who have forgotten how to grab things. "Rain," Cale said. "Rain's outside," Jonah replied. "Whatever that is, it's working on you from the inside out." Cale didn't talk about the wallet. It felt wrong to say. saying it would turn a private decision into a public currency, and he wanted it to remain credit paid to the ledger no one sees. He wiped a table after he ate, and then another, because there's a way to thank the world that doesn't require language. By evening, he had a day's work lined up, sweeping for Mr. Golly at the auto shop in exchange for a sandwich and $10 cash, then a couple of hours at the back of the grocery unloading crates. Small jobs were coins scattered in the couch of the city. If you knew where to reach, you could pull enough for bus fare and the particular kind of dignity that comes from being able to buy your own bar of soap. The days threaded themselves into a rope long enough to climb. He bought a second-hand backpack with zippers that didn't lie, a pair of boots that made his bones believe they belonged to a person going somewhere, and a notebook. On the first page he wrote 3 words: try to stay. Stay with the long thoughts instead of the short ones that end in fists. Stay with the people who say your name like it is not a problem to solve. Stay, even in the rain. Maya got him a bed inside, 3 months if he followed the rules, 6 if he didn't give anyone cause to use his name in a bad way. He learned the choreography of shared living, the earplugs for the snorer, the spare blanket for the diabetic who always felt cold, the particular crease you put in your demeanor when someone is spiraling so you look like a wall sturdy enough for them to lean on without falling through. He attended GED classes in a church basement where the chalkboard had a divot in the middle like a smile. And always, quietly, he built a habit so small it would be easy to mistake for superstition. Every morning after coffee, he walked past the bus bench where the wallet had waited. He picked up what others left behind: receipts, coffee sleeves, a glove that had lost its twin. He turned in 2 phones, a library card, and once a broken necklace whose charm was a silver lark. He wrote lark in his notebook and circled it because the sound tasted like a door opening. It would be nice to say that good begets good on a schedule. It does not. Kindness is not a vending machine. In his second month inside, a man who slept on the top bunk vanished with Cale's backpack and boots. He sat on his bunk and felt the familiar furnace of anger roar into his ribs, making smoke of his restraint. He wanted to rage at the dorm manager, at the man, at the invisible accountant in the sky who balanced people's fortunes with a blindfold on crooked. Instead, he borrowed a pair of shoes that didn't fit and lined paper with new lists: try to stay. Try again. Stay again. He earned enough for a prepaid phone. The first number he typed was the one Mira had written, but the grocery list paper had worn thin where his wallet pressed. When he held it up to the light, the last 2 digits had peeled away like leaves. He stared at the partial number as if the rest might grow back. It did not. He folded the scrap and tucked it into his notebook beside the word lark. 2 years became 3 and then 5 in the slow, honest way years become themselves when you're counting by pay stubs and nights spent without incident. Cale worked day labor at first, a river of heavy lifting that carved his back into new maps, then learned maintenance at the shelter. He could fix a leaky valve with a gasket of patience and floss, coax heat back into radiators that coughed like old men, paint a wall so that the old scuffs read like memories instead of warnings. The work suited him. He liked making broken things hold. Brother Jonah died one spring, quietly, as if even his departure had good manners. The dining room echoed for weeks, then filled with a new sound as the volunteers accustomed themselves to a world where no one told them football scores uninvited. Cale spoke at the memorial because someone had to say the obvious, that some lives are so steadily good they leave behind a kind of seam in the air you can put your fingers in to hold yourself up when you are tired. Maya started a program to help residents train for building maintenance. Cale taught the Tuesday night class on caulking because he had discovered that teaching is a way to remember things. He met people whose names arrived in him like coins clinking into a jar: Adia who folded her grief into origami cranes, Owen who could make a roll of duct tape last longer than a rent-controlled lease, Sita who swore in 3 languages with the precision of a poet. Sometimes he thought of Izzy in the glass building where oncology lived. He imagined the photograph updated, 2 front teeth grown in, braces maybe, laughter still tilting her face toward the sun. He didn't know if the big day went the way big days should. The world is not in the business of providing epilogues ahead of schedule. But he carried a belief that felt less like optimism and more like duty: when you return something, the world returns something you cannot inventory. Years have a way of sliding into 15 while you're looking carefully at the day in front of you. Cale was 31 when the winter came in snap fast, turning the sidewalks into glass and the city's evening breath into fog. The shelter had a new wing and better coffee, and a mural in the dining room of a river moving through a city with its own ideas about direction. He lived in a small studio on the third floor, a room, a window, a plant that tolerated his inconsistent watering. He had a toolbox that was his, a wall hook with a jacket that belonged to no one else, a bed he did not have to surrender in the morning to anyone. On a Tuesday in late January, the kind of day that makes bones remember being stone, Cale was repairing a stubborn radiator in the women's dorm when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He ignored it. It buzzed again. He wiped his hands on a rag, answered, and listened to a voice that spoke with the careful articulation of someone with something complicated to say. "Mr. Murad?" the voice asked. "Yes. My name is Darren Kovac. I'm with Vance and Hartwell." The name Vance fell into the old well inside him and ripples spread outward, past the notebook with the circled lark, past the bus bench, past a photograph of a girl who preferred not to be a queen. "I'm sorry," he said, "because politeness buys time." "We're in the neighborhood," Darren said. "Could we stop by?" "We?" "Miss Vance and her daughter. If this is a bad time, we can." Cale's heart did a strange arithmetic, counting backward and forward at once. "We're open," he said, and told himself it was just curiosity walking toward him, not a past he had tried very hard to leave in a shape he could live with. He finished the radiator because leaving something half-fixed is a kind of theft, washed his hands hard enough to scrape back old paint, and stepped into the courtyard where the cold kept company with the statue of a heron someone had welded from scrap pipe. The sky had the flat, bright look it gets when it means business. 5 minutes later, a luxury sedan, one of those improbable creatures sleek enough to look like speed even, stopped, eased to the curb in a glide so smooth the puddles pretended not to exist. The engine idled with a sound like a cat purring in a library. Tinted window. Polished chrome. A license plate that suggested things like access and doors that open on their own. People notice cars like that the way they notice sudden weather. Heads turned. Conversations paused at their commas. Cale felt the building itself listen, brick and beam leaning imperceptibly forward. The rear door opened. A woman stepped out in a wool coat the color of late afternoon, hair streaked with the kind of gray that looks like a decision. She put a hand on the door frame as if steadying herself on a memory. Behind her, a young woman slid out, 21, maybe 22, a scarf looped around her throat in a way that looked like a promise someone kept. She carried the easy grace of a person who has spent years learning the choreography of carefulness, how to move through the world and still hold a line of joy. The woman's eyes scanned the courtyard until they found him. There's a way a gaze feels when it recognizes you deeply enough to take your name and seat it in the front row of itself. This gaze had that weight. "Cale Murad," she called, voice threaded with sunlight and winter. He nodded because sometimes nodding is the only way to keep breathing. The young woman stepped forward, studying his face with the grass-green intensity of someone comparing a memory to reality. She smiled, and in that smile he saw a gap that had once divided her front teeth like a note between two chords. The gap was gone now, replaced by a neat line of enamel, but the music of it lingered. "Mr. Murad," she said, and her voice trembled as if the words had traveled a long way and were out of breath. "My mother said you'd be here. What can I do for you?" Cale asked, hands suddenly unsure of themselves. The chauffeur, Darren, he assumed, closed the door with the hush of expensive mechanics and took 2 respectable steps back, the way seasons make room for each other at the threshold. The older woman, Mira, and he knew it before he needed to know it, reached into her coat and drew out a photograph protected in hard plastic. She held it like something that had lived too long in a wallet and not long enough in the world. He knew the picture before his eyes told him what it contained, a little girl with a gap-toothed grin and a medical bracelet peeking from beneath her sleeve, cheeks freckled to the edges of her joy. "We've been looking for you," Mira said softly. "4 years." The young woman beside her slid her hand into her mother's coat pocket like a bookmark, holding a place. Cale glanced past them at the car, at the shelter door propped open with a brick, at the courtyard where the heron stared skyward as if waiting for an argument from God. He realized his legs had sent word to his balance that they were stepping into water, and now everything in him adjusted to keep from slipping. "Why?" he asked, and heard in his own voice the rounded vowels of the boy he had been at the bus bench, asking the world to explain itself. The young woman took a steadying breath that looked like a beginning and reached into the pocket of her scarf. She withdrew a folded paper gone thin at the creases. When she unfolded it, he recognized the faint ghost of a grocery store logo on one corner and, beside it, in hurried pen, the letters of his name and enough digits of a phone number to make the rest ache. "I think this belongs to you," she said, and placed the paper in his open palm the way a person returns a wallet, or a life, or a promise. The wind moved through the courtyard like a hand turning a page. Somewhere a pot clanged in the kitchen. A woman laughed at a joke the city had told her 1,000 times and finally got right. Cale looked up from the paper to the two faces waiting, for what, he could not yet name, and the day tilted toward an edge he had not known he was walking along until now. "Get in," Mira said gently, nodding toward the open door of the car where the leather seats looked like a sentence without a period. "Please. There's something we need to tell you." Cale felt the muscle in his jaw tick with the memory of every trap disguised as kindness. He felt the counterweight, the Tupperware of pasta wrapped in a dish towel, warm enough to fog the lid, lower into the other side of the scale. He looked at Maya across the courtyard, watching from the gate, her robin keen eyes steady as a lighthouse. He took one step forward, then another, as if learning again how to move toward the thing that might change you. At the lip of the door, he heard the young woman whisper his name like it contained a doorbell no one had rung in 15 years. "Cale." He looked back. Her eyes were shining, and in them he saw not just gratitude but a kind of awe that frightened him with its magnitude. "Your decision at a bus bench," she said, each word careful, "is why I'm standing here." The city seemed to inhale around them, the way crowds do before a tightrope walker takes their first step. Cale placed his hand on the polished frame of the car and felt his reflection blur there, boy and man, past and possible, waiting for the next sentence to reveal whether it would be a question, an answer, or something more dangerous, a promise he could no longer avoid. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Avoid. Cale eased himself into the back seat with the wariness of a man who'd learned that some doors are mouths. The leather gave under his weight with a sigh, the scent of cedar and something expensive folding around him. Mira slid in opposite, the scarfed young woman close beside her as if they were two notes of the same chord. The door whispered shut. Outside, the shelter courtyard resumed its rhythms, the clink of a mop bucket, the staccato laugh of a woman who had just remembered a joke from 10 years ago and found it still good. Inside, time gathered itself like a cat preparing to leap. Mira watched his hands. People who have lived through long corridors of waiting notice hands, they carry the tremors that mouths hide. "Thank you for getting in," she said, then offered a smile that was part apology and part invitation. "I'm Mira. We met once. Briefly." "We met at a door," he said, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "I gave you a wallet. You gave me pasta." He tried for a small smile. It landed somewhere in the vicinity. The young woman nodded, eyes bright. "I'm Izzy," she said. Isolde when mom's trying to sound serious. She angled her face toward him the way sunflowers lean, curious, unafraid. "You don't know me." "Not exactly. But I grew up with your name in our house like it was a candle we lit on hard days." Cale looked down at the folded scrap she had put in his palm, a ghost of a grocery store logo, the numbers blurred where years had rubbed them thin. His own name was there in Myra's quick, practical script, Cale Murad. He felt the tug of two eras stitched together by a line of ink. "Why now?" he asked. There were kinder ways to begin, but some questions arrive already wearing work boots. Mira drew in a breath that carried the weight of rooms with beeping machines and windows that did not open. "Because we finally know how to say thank you in a way that doesn't insult what you did." She watched him absorb the sentence, then continued. "That morning, I didn't even know my wallet was gone until I reached for the insurance card at the desk. We were already late. I had been up all night trying to make Izzy eat. She was so small, and when they took her blood, it looked like someone had poured red into milk. She paused, and Izzy's fingers found hers. If we had missed the intake window, they would have pushed us to a later time. And later, that day, would have meant dangerous. Izzy nodded. They needed the card to admit me. Mom was on the phone with the insurer. I was making jokes about the fish tank in the waiting room because the yellow one looked like a lemon with a grudge. Her smile tilted, then steadied. You came to the door with a wallet and a photograph of a little girl missing 2 front teeth. She looked like she thought the world owed her a pony. Cale's throat tightened. He hadn't known that part, hadn't known the exact shape of the moment his decision intersected the machinery of a hospital and turned a gear that would not have turned without him. He swallowed. I just didn't want you to spend your day calling banks. Myra's laugh had river stones in it. There's more to it, of course. Life is never a single hinge. There were doctors and nurses and medications with names that sounded like planets. There was a woman named Talia who cleaned the 4 stands and told us jokes too terrible not to laugh at. There was luck, and there was stubbornness, and there was the kind of science you never think you will meet outside a documentary. But the door we needed to walk through that morning? You unlocked it. Izzy leaned forward, elbows on her knees. I like beginnings, she said. And you are one of mine. He felt something inside him step back and sit down, like a worker at the end of a shift, and at the same time another part of him stood up taller. Okay, he said softly. Okay. Darren, the driver, glanced at them in the mirror and then looked away, the way winter looks when it decides to be courteous. Mira reached into a folio and took out a slim folder. We've been looking for you for years, she said. We kept the scrap with your name in a file called Find Cale, which is both unironic and exactly the file name of people who don't work in tech. She smiled at herself. We tried shelters, hospitals, churches. For a while we stood outside the 9th Street bus stop on rainy mornings like it was a shrine. It was Maya, Izzy added, the word in her mouth like the name of a favorite teacher. She saw a photo of me speaking at a fundraiser and sent a message to the foundation that said, and I quote, if your girl is the gap-toothed menace who beat leukemia in 2011, I know the young man who brought you a wallet. She called you a winterbird, someone who looks like wind would knock him over but still shows up in a storm. Cale pictured Maya at the gate, Robin Keene. He wondered what it had cost her to put his name in someone else's mouth. Pride is a feral thing, you set out food for it, but it still bites. What is this? He asked, nodding toward the folder. A map, Mira said simply, and laid it open on the seat between them. Inside were renderings, soft watercolors edged with hard pen, of a building that had once been a warehouse and now, on paper, had windows like ideas. Classrooms. A workshop with tool walls. Dorms with doors that had locks solid enough to make sleep a negotiation you could win. A courtyard with raised beds where herbs would overrun their borders in the best possible way. On the cover, embossed in small, stubborn gold, the Lark House. Cale let the name land. It hit with the clean bell tone of something that had been circling and finally found the tower. The Lark, he whispered. The silver charm. The circled word in his notebook. Doors opening. Why that name? He asked. Izzy smiled. Because of a story Mom told me after the worst week. She said there are birds that sing even at dawn so cold it makes fences blue. Larks don't ask the day to be safe before they greet it. She glanced at the scrap in his hand. Also because Maya told us about the word in your notebook. He closed his eyes for a moment, brief and complete, the way you do when rain on a roof finally hits rhythm. When he opened them, Mira was watching him with the tenderness of someone holding a glass that looks ordinary until light goes through it. We want you to run it, she said. Cale stared, so still the leather seat seemed to register his surprise as a temperature change. Run, this? He gestured toward the renderings, toward the future sketched with clean lines and generous margins. I teach caulking on Tuesdays. Mira nodded. We know your Tuesdays. We know about the radiator you coaxed back to life with a prayer and a gasket you carved from an eraser when the part supplier was closed. We know about the way you keep your classes open 15 minutes past end time because some people don't know how to arrive on time until someone shows them that arriving late is still arriving. We know that when the elevator fails, you carry groceries up 3 flights yourself and pretend you wanted the exercise. Izzy leaned in. I volunteer here on Thursdays sometimes. Quietly. You don't always see me because you're busy making a building hold. But I see you. The Lark House needs someone who understands that the first thing you fix is never the broken pipe. It's the idea that things can't be fixed. You want me to be, what? Cale asked, searchlight turning slowly across a harbor he did not know he had. Director of Operations, Mira said. Builder of Systems. Keeper of Keys. Teacher of Tuesdays and 8 other days that don't technically exist on calendars but always show up in people's lives. She exhaled. We can pay decently. Not to erase 15 years, but to honor them with something that uses everything you learned while surviving. Cale's heart beat once hard, like a fist on a locked door. He looked out the window at the brick of the shelter, the welded heron staring upward as if expecting lightning to apologize. He thought of his studio with its uneven plant and the hook that held his jacket and how both had begun to feel like commitments instead of miracles. I have work here, he said, which was true, and I don't know how to run a dream, which was truer. Mira nodded as if she had taken a class in the language of honest reluctance and passed. We're not asking for an answer today. We're asking you to come see the building. We're close to finishing phase 1. But if this is not for you, tell us who it's for. We'll listen. The car pulled away from the curb, winter light painting the hood thin and cold. The city slid past, the pawn shop that had somehow survived 3 landlords, the bakery where the first loaf cracked each morning, the bus bench that had held a leather hinge between 2 lives. Cale watched it all with the austere attentiveness of a man who knows that memory is a map you only get to draw once. The Lark House lived in a part of the city where old factories stood like tired kings. The warehouse was a long red rectangle with a spine of skylights and a new skin of hope. Inside, heat hung in the air with the vague uncertainty of a person who has not yet been introduced around the room. Workers moved like ants over a chessboard, measured, purposeful. The smell was sawdust and fresh paint and the faint tang of ozone from wires being asked to behave. Cale stepped onto the concrete and felt space warp around his attention. He knew buildings the way some people know faces, where they hold strain, where they ache, where a patient push will persuade them to be kinder. He ran a hand over a column and felt the sincerity of the steel. He looked up at the skylights and pictured the wrestle they would have with summer heat. He could already see the vents he would ask for, the film he would apply. Izzy watched him watch the building. There is a peculiar holiness in seeing someone meet a place they might love. She let him walk the perimeter in silence, Mira beside her, Darren hovering at the door like an ellipsis. Upstairs, the dorm rooms were bright, if spare, 2 beds, 2 lockers, a window that could open but would stop safely before tragedy. Cale touched the hinges, turned the latch, studied the slope of the sill where someone's elbow would learn to rest while they learned to believe afternoons could be ordinary. In the workshop, a pegboard waited for tools. He stood before it and saw Tuesday nights multiplied, students arranged like a sentence you want to read slowly. He imagined labels under hooks, not a hammer, but close for the rubber mallet, lefty-loosey righty-tighty in block letters for the wrench set, measure kindness twice, cut judgment once printed large where the eye would land when frustration grew teeth. You built this, he said, finally, to Mira and Izzy. It wasn't a question. We drew pictures and convinced people with money that pictures mattered, Mira said dryly. A foolish number of people believed us. The rest were bullied, bribed with cinnamon rolls, or both. She sobered. There's one more room. They led him to a small office tucked at the corner of the workshop. On the door, a brushed steel plate with 4 letters etched clean and stubborn, Cale. He stopped. The world is not supposed to know your name in advance. He felt gratitude and panic rise together, a tide meeting wind. You don't have to accept to keep the plate, Izzy said, reading him. But I wanted you to know we are not auditioning the idea of you. We have already cast you in the story, if you want the part. He ran a thumb over the etched letters until the ridges warmed. Then the building gave a sound he knew too well, a relay clicking somewhere too often, the electrical version of a cough. He looked toward the main hall. The lights blinked, considered the future, and went out. In the sudden dim, the workers stilled. Someone called for a flashlight. A compressor sighed to a guilty halt. The silence had weight, the still fans made it heavier. Izzy's hand found her mother's. "Is that us?" she asked, meaning the building and then meaning more. Cale was already moving. He didn't run, he fell forward into competence, which looks like calm if you don't know the work it takes. In the utility room, he found the new panel, a polished confidence bristling with breakers. He placed his palm flat to feel its mutter. He listened. He always listened. The main feed had tripped, the backup generator was yawning awake too slowly. He traced the run in his head, through conduit, across beams, to the roof where a box waited that would hate the cold. "Roof," he said to no one and everyone, and took the stairs 2 at a time. The hatch opened onto a slate of winter sky. The wind had opinions. He hunched into it and crossed to the generator. The housing vibrated with a sickly rhythm, a song trying to remember its own melody. He threw the access latch and leaned into the warm metallic breath of machinery. Condensation had frozen in a line near the fuel intake, a cheap gasket argued with physics and lost. He cursed softly in a language made of hardware store aisles and field fixes. He stole a screw from a bracket that didn't need to, stripped his scarf for fabric, and made a seal out of persistence. He cleaned the sensor with the corner of a handkerchief he had carried for years, because some habits, like kindness, don't wear out, and reset the governor. The generator coughed, thought about its options, and chose life. The building exhaled. Below, lights warmed into being. The compressor shook off sleep and returned to work like a great animal persuaded gently back to its harness. The wind tried not to look impressed. When Cale came back down, cheeks stung pink, Izzy was waiting at the bottom of the stairs like a question that had turned into a statement. "You made the dark less," she said, simple as weather. He shrugged, embarrassed by verbs that suggested miracles. "I made a stubborn thing agreeable for a while." Mira laughed, a clear, tired, delighted sound. "Welcome to operations," she said. They walked the rest of the building, the 3 of them moving like a constellation that had just realized it was a shape. They talked in practicalities, budget lines, hiring, training nights, how to write protocols that don't treat people like problems waiting to happen. Cale asked questions that revealed the corners he notices. What happens if the hot water dies during showers? How many keys will exist for the med cabinet? How to teach residents to call their rooms home without making home feel like a loan they could default on. By late afternoon, the light went white and slant, construction dropped to a low murmur. They stood in the courtyard where, in spring, the raised beds would demand names. Izzy watched him study the soil. "We're going to plant thyme," she said. "And let it get entirely out of hand." "They say it creeps," Cale said. "They also say it heals," she replied. He felt laughter elbow sadness politely aside. "Both seem useful." Mira checked her watch, then checked his face. "We should get you back. There's weather coming in. Also, we still want you to sleep on this, not because we doubt, but because rushing a yes is just a slower form of no." They were nearly to the car when Cale's phone rang. Maya's name on the screen climbed into his chest with its old bright feet. He answered, and her voice came through both urgent and measured, a storm radio voice. "Where are you?" she asked. "At a possibility," he said, "because some words are superstitious and must be kept in pockets until they believe you." "There's a burst main on our block," she said. "City says they'll get to it when they get to it. We've got 37 residents, 2 newborns, 1 heart condition, and a boiler that doesn't like to be ignored." Her breath made a small fog. "We need you." He was already moving, thumb hovering over the map app as if he could wish distance into hiding. "On my way." He glanced at Mira and Izzy. "I need Go, Mira said, already stepping toward the driver's door. We'll take you. The sedan 8 streets. The water main had turned the block into a gray river lit by the caution strobes of a single beleaguered utility truck. Maya stood on the steps with a bullhorn tucked under her arm like a promise, cheeks chapped, hair asking the wind for a truce. Residents clustered in the dining room, steam ghosting the windows with anxious breath. The building radiated that specific fear warmth, hot at the surface, cold beneath, like a fever breaking toward either direction. Cale moved through it like a familiar dream. He triaged as he went, hands to the boiler first, eyes to the breaker panel second, instructions over his shoulder in a voice that knew how to be obeyed without sounding like it enjoyed it. Adia, blankets from storage. Owen, sand the entrance, no falls tonight. Sita, fill the kettles before pressure drops, put them in the dorms. Tell people we are doing the 3 things that matter: heat, light, and information. In the basement, he listened. Pipes complained in long vowels. The boiler muttered the way a stubborn uncle does. He bled air from the radiators with a key he wore around his neck on a loop of heavy string, a relic from years of making cold rooms remember their obligations. He rigged bypass lines with sections of hose that should have been retired, talked softly to valves that preferred coaxing to command. Upstairs, the dining room shifted from brittle panic to the softer noise of people deciding to trust a plan they could see. Maya appeared in the doorway with a flashlight and a question she didn't need to ask. He gave her a thumbs up that, in other languages, would have been a prayer. She nodded, then looked past him to Mira and Izzy, who had taken up positions where help lives, coats off, sleeves up, eyes watchful. Recognition flared. A future meeting had occurred in the present. By 10, the temperature in the dorms had stabilized. The city finally sent a crew with a competence Cale silently blessed. He stood in the boiler room with his back against the cinder block and let fatigue lean its full weight. The sound of heat working returned like an orchestra tuning to the same note. He closed his eyes, and the dark behind them was simple, for once, no edges, no warnings. Footsteps approached. He opened his eyes to find Izzy at the threshold, hair escaped from its loop, cheeks flushed from carrying kettles that laughed steam into cold rooms. Director of Operations, she said softly, testing the title like a found key. Feels like you already accepted. He smiled, small, private, dangerous. Feels like the building remembered we're on the same side. He rubbed his thumb where the steel plate's ridge had warmed his skin earlier. I will need to sit with this. I have loyalties and leases that are small but fierce. Izzy nodded. We can be patient. Patience is a muscle we've both overtrained. She hesitated, then, there's one more thing we haven't told you. Mira appeared at her daughter's shoulder, as if the sentence had called her. She held an envelope, cream, heavy, the kind of paper that makes you aware of watermarks without seeing them. She offered it to Cale with both hands. What is it? He asked, not reaching yet. There are some doors you let the door tell you about before you touch the handle. A letter, Mira said. From someone who thought he had nothing to say to anyone but figures and markets. He was wrong. He asked us to give this to you if we ever found you. Cale looked at Izzy. Her eyes held a mix of mischief and solemnity he recognized from children who've learned the world is a ledger and also a song. Who? He asked, though the answer wove itself through the air already. My father, she said. Not by biology. By law and by the way he showed up. After I got better, Mom married a man whose last name is on the foundation with ours. Hartwell. He was the kind of rich that makes people quieter when he enters a room. She smiled faintly. But with me, he was just a person who cried at insurance commercials. He kept your name in his desk. He wrote this a month before he died. The letter had weight. Cale took it and felt the gravity of it land, not abstract, not performative, the literal push of ink into paper sent across an improbable span of days to find his hands. He slid a finger under the seal and opened it along its clean line. The handwriting was angled and neat, the letters disciplined into a formation that suggested a mind that loved order until disorder taught it mercy. Cale read in silence while boiler heat rose like a blessing and the building listened like a friend who had learned patience the hard way. Mr. Murad. You do not know me, though you have passed through my home in the form of a story I have asked to hear on difficult afternoons. I have built things in this city. None of them matter as much as the fact that one day, a 16-year-old boy decided that a wallet was an address where a human being lived, and not a pile of anonymous numbers, asterisk. Asterisk. I am not good at gratitude. I am good at checklists. So I have made one for myself that ends with this: find Cale Murad and give him something that is not charity but alignment. I sailed my life along a wind of inequities I did not see until my wife and daughter taught me how to look. I have placed in trust a fund that will live past me. It will do what I could not have imagined at 25 and what I could almost imagine at 70, build structures that teach structures to be kinder, asterisk. Asterisk. If you are reading this, it means my people have found you. If you will have it, there is a position waiting at something we are calling the Lark House. There is also, in an account with your name, an amount of money that would embarrass us both to discuss. Use it not to undo the past, that arithmetic is cruel, but to make your future less contingent on whether, asterisk. Asterisk. I suspect you will try to refuse. That is why I have arranged it so that refusal helps someone else. Decline, and the funds go to the shelter you call home. Accept, and you will still find that the shelter receives what it needs, because my wife is a person who does not let go of things until they become better than she found them, asterisk. Asterisk. I hope we meet. If not, thank you for proving that the smallest hinge turns the heaviest door, asterisk. Sincerely. R. Hartwell. Cale held the letter until the paper warmed and the loops of ink felt like something living. He looked up to find Mira and Izzy studying his face with the kind of attention that is not pressure but invitation. What if I am not enough? He asked before he could shut the door on the thought. Izzy's mouth did the particular soft smile that belongs to people who have counted their cells and then gone on to count their days. You already survived your worst guess about yourself, she said. The rest is logistics. He laughed then, brief and astonished, as if someone had put a coin in a slot he hadn't known was there and a light had come on in a hallway he had always assumed was condemned. They climbed the stairs to the dining room where the world had resumed its ordinary holy, spoons against bowls, murmured thanks in multiple languages, all meaning we made it another hour. Maya lifted the bullhorn like a toast when she saw them. Our boy fixed the heat, she announced to no one and everyone. A cheer answered, messy and perfect. Mira touched Cale's sleeve. We'll give you a week, she said. Then we'll come back with cinnamon rolls and unreasonable optimism. Make it 2 days, Izzy said, teasing, then sobered. Make it the time you need. They shrugged on their coats. Outside, snow had begun, fine, insistent. It turned the streetlights into halos and the vans into beetles with soft backs. The sedan waited, patient as a promise kept. Cale walked them to the curb. Izzy pressed a card into his hand, their numbers, direct, no receptionists to audition your need. He slid it into his wallet behind a photograph of the shelter mural that he kept like a talisman and thought, not for the first time, about how life sometimes imagines itself into being through paperwork. Mira stepped closer and in a gesture so mother-simple it caught him unprepared, smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from his coat. We'll see you soon, she said. He nodded, aware of the calculus happening inside him, the hot and cold flush of yes colliding with the steady, loyal pulse of stay. The snow arranged itself on the shoulders of his hesitation like decoration. The car door opened. Izzy paused with one foot inside, then turned back. Cale? Yes. I know you think the decision is the cliff. It isn't. She glanced at the shelter windows where silhouettes moved like sentences being written. The cliff is what happens when you say yes to being seen. The line landed inside him like a stake. He felt the tug forward. The sedan pulled away, taillights dwindling to 2 small red parentheses around a future sentence. Cale stood in the snow and let the cold argue him toward clarity. He went back inside and made rounds, checking radiators like old friends who prefer you not to text before you come over. He spoke with Adia about a leak in Dorm B, laughed when Owen tried to fix a squeak with a joke and almost succeeded, watched Sita show a new resident how to label a drawer in a way that felt like naming. Sometime after midnight, when the building sighed into the quiet that comes after trouble, he unlocked his tiny office off the boiler room, his not-yet-etched plate of thought in his pocket, and sat with Hartwell's letter open like a map. He wrote, "Try to stay, try to build, try to say yes." The last word burned through the others like a wire heating under current. He closed his notebook. The plant in his studio would want water in the morning. The Tuesday class would expect him to bring duct tape and metaphors. The city would put down one more layer of snow and ask its people to balance carefully. He slept 3 hours, dreamless. At dawn, he woke to a knocking at a door he could not place. Not the dorm. Not his office. Not the idea of the Lark House knocking from the future. The knock again, firm, human, here. He crossed the hallway. Maya met him with a face that had something like grief in it, and also something else, anticipation's cousin. "There's someone here to see you," she said quietly. "He says he knew you before you knew you." Cale frowned. Before? A figure stepped from the shadow of the entryway into the watery winter light, older, thinner, the kind of worn that happens to men who have tried to make apologies to weather. He carried a pair of boots in his hands like an offering. Cale's stomach sank and lifted at once. The boots were scuffed, familiar as the memory of a blister. 15 winters ago, a man had climbed from his bunk and walked out with Cale's boots and backpack like he was taking out the trash to see if it could find its own way home. Anger rose, surprised to find it still had a key to an old room inside him. The man swallowed. His voice was hoarse where nights had rubbed it. "Name's Rafe," he said. "I don't expect you to remember. I stole something that wasn't mine. Been carrying that fact longer than these." He lifted the boots, shame and hope both in the tilt of his hands. "I sobered up last spring. I work over on 11th. Guy named Owen said if I wanted to make anything like amends, I should come here first." He tried a smile. "Says there's a Tuesday class might take a student who knows the difference between a floor and bottom." Maya looked at Cale the way a referee looks at a player who is also a friend. The building waited. The morning did that bright, white thing to the sky. Somewhere, a kettle took a breath and began to hum. Cale took the boots. They were lighter than memory. He felt 15 years of yes and no and stay and go line up like tools on a wall. He looked at Rafe, then at Maya, then at the door beyond which the city was learning how to be itself again under snow. He took a breath that felt like a step onto a wire. "I have an answer," he said. Maya's eyebrows rose. "To which question?" "To both," he replied, and felt the future lean forward. "Rafe, Tuesdays at 6. And Mira," he touched the pocket where the etched plate would sit. "Tell her I'll bring a key." The door opened behind him. Izzy stood there, snow in her hair, cheeks flushed from a run that said she had not learned caution in everything. She looked at the boots in his hand, at the letter on the table behind him, at the way the room had tipped toward a decision. "You said yes?" she asked, breath clouding like punctuation. Cale nodded once. "I said yes." Izzy's smile arrived like a lamp finding its cord. "Then you should probably know one more thing," she said, mischief and solemnity sharing her face again. "The Lark House opens in 6 weeks. But our inspector moved us up. The final walkthrough is in 2 hours. The lights flickered. Somewhere deep in the building, the boiler gave a disgruntled sigh like an old man asked to dance at a wedding. Outside, sirens threaded the air, 2 notes repeating, growing louder. Maya's radio crackled. "Water main on 11th just ruptured," a voice said. "Pressure drop predicted across 3 blocks. If you've got critical systems, prep for a hit." Cale looked at Izzy, at the letter, at the boots in his hands, at the stairwell that led down to the beating heart of the shelter and out into a city where a warehouse with his name on a door waited to either pass inspection or break a little under winter. He smiled, a fierce, private thing, and stepped toward the stairs. Let's see how many doors a lark can open in one morning, he said, and the building seemed to nod. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.